but I'd like to try to show where everything is connected. So if you take a look, there's a brass fitting, and on the far side of that 90-degree angle is the oil pressure gauge hydraulic line, which goes from here up into this area and back until we get to that brass area. Then we take a 90-degree turn, and from that 90-degree turn, you can hopefully see here, maybe here, where we're going into the transmission port. Now you notice we have this in one port, but just in front of there is another plug for a different port. That is not the one you want. You want the one that is recessed. And there are 3 of these ports. One here, and one further back. I don't know if I can get my finger up there. Yeah, right here. So a lot of folks, including me, will say, when you pick your port for testing, you pick the one in the middle. Well, it's not 50% in the middle. It's in between the 2 end ports. So it's this one here. What we're looking at now is how to set the automatic overdrive AOD line pressure using the throttle valve setting. The engine is idling about 725 RPM right now. Earlier, I put in place a small measuring gauge. That measuring gauge is 0.475 inches thick. I put it between the holder for the cable and the beginning of the cable linkage. When that is in place in neutral or park with the engine idling, we should be getting between 30 and 35 pounds of pressure for its starting setting. If I look at the gauge, we're getting about 34 pounds of pressure. Now, the other month, when we first put this transmission in and set this, it was set for 35 pounds of pressure, and the shift points were too low. So when I got the car home, I adjusted the tension of the throttle valve cable a little bit more to increase that pressure. Well, apparently something has happened, maybe with the cable stretching because it's new, I don't know what. But right now, it is, instead of being higher than 35 pounds of pressure, it's sitting at about 33 pounds of pressure. So I can set it a little higher yet again. The reason is because I want my upshift for 1, 2, 2, 3 shifting to occur at a higher road speed than it had been. Also, if this is set too low, like under 30 pounds, it can cause the transmission to become damaged very quickly. I'd rather be too high than too low. So here's how I'm going to adjust it. There's 2 places to adjust. The first way is to loosen this lock spiral on the cable and move the cable back and forth. That is for a very large or gross adjustment. I want a fine adjustment. So I'm going to loosen this lock nut and move the cable sheath back a little bit until we get about 37 or 38 pounds of pressure. Then I'll lock it down. So here's how we do it. cable sheath. I loosened it up. Now I'm going to tighten the front nut to pull the sheath forward. No, I'm not. I'm going back the other way.
So that just tightens it?
Okay, I've tightened it up a little bit. Let's see what the pressure is now.
It's the same. Barely moved.
Okay, I'm going to move it a bunch more then. I'm going to pull the cable and see what happens.
Yeah, that went up big time. Okay, now if you don't touch it, that went up to 35 right where you are now. So that went up about.
Did it? Okay. So if I lock it down now, it's at the factory setting between 30 and 35. Because I want my shift points a little higher, I'm going to bring up a little bit more.
Okay, it's at 36 right now.
That's good.
Okay. Okay, it didn't move, but you know what? Last time you gave it a full thrust, then it came back down in position. So pull the, there. Yeah, now it's at 39. So it wasn't moving until you just did that.
A little more.
39.
spacer gauge from the throttle valve cable linkage. When I do that, the pressure should drop down to zero. As soon as I open the throttle, you'll see it come back up. So we know the throttle valve is working. With the gauge in place, it was set to the factory spec a little bit higher, because I want a little higher. Now we're going to take out a road test and see how it behaves. We're going to go out on a road test after I had demonstrated how to properly set the automatic overdrive transmission's throttle valve line pressure at the carburetor linkage using a special spacer tool, which is 0.275 inches in thickness. The factory setting is between 30 and 35 pounds. I set ours closer to 40 pounds with the gauge in place, which simply means I'm running a little higher line pressure than the factory recommends, because I want my shift points to go from first to second gear and second to third gear automatically under light load conditions at a little higher road speed than the factory specs allowed for or provided for. Also, I'm going to show the impact of using the original gear shifter with an AOD transmission. Now, why this is interesting is that the shifter usually would made up to a C4, FMX, or C6 automatic transmission, and this detent at the transmission and the shifter was for park, reverse, neutral, drive, 2, and 1. The behavior is, if we're at a stop and we put the transmission in gear position 1, it will run as first gear and first gear only. It will not upshift. It sets and holds gear 1. If we go to gear position 2, it, unlike a GM or Chrysler transmission that starts in first and then to second automatically in gear position 2, it starts and holds in gear position 2. D, drive. From a standing start, the transmission shifts from first to second gear and then second to third, depending upon the governor on the tail shaft indicating the road speed and how much vacuum is coming to the vacuum modulator from the engine, indicating how much load the engine is under. So the shift points will be at different speeds depending upon engine load and road speed. Further, shifting when you're at speed in the car, let's say 40 miles an hour, from D drive to second gear, normally the transmission will say, you know, the governor's not saying I can't go to second gear, I'm not going too fast for it, so boom, it goes to second gear and it holds it. If you move it then to first gear, if the governor is telling the transmission you are spinning too fast because the road speed is too high to safely go in first gear, it will not go into first gear. But if you're going 30, 35 miles an hour, it'll say, you know what, the governor's not telling me I can't do it, so boom, you're in first gear, and it'll hold it until such time you shift out of it. Now, the automatic overdrive transmission, after that mouthful, is set up differently. When you look at an AOD equipped car, which this isn't, it has positions P park, R reverse, and neutral, OD for overdrive, fourth gear, and then D for drive, which is gears 1 through 3. It doesn't have a sixth position on the shifter. And I had initially assumed that meant that the AOD didn't have a sixth position. I was wrong, and I will demonstrate that and try to notate verbally what I'm doing as I'm driving.
Go.
With the previous behavior, when the transmission throttle valve line pressure setting was set for between 30 and 35 pounds, what would happen is in overdrive position, I would start from a standing stop, and the 1-2 upshift and 2-3 upshift would occur before I was at 20 miles an hour. And the shift into overdrive would occur about 36 miles an hour. That was happening a bit too soon for light load purposes as far as I was concerned. So I adjusted the line pressure to be closer to 40 pounds. So what I'm going to do now is accelerate from a standing start and have Linda record the miles per hour on the speedometer we are at when a light load upshift occurs. So here we go. We're going to take off. We're in overdrive position, And so far, gear 1, and we're clear of traffic. Here we go. First gear, shift to 2, shift to 3, and finally overdrive. So it's happening, the 1-2 shift is happening sooner than it was before. The 2-3 shift is occurring a little bit soon, but I was awfully light load. I'm going to come to another stop and do this again with a little more throttle pressure from a standing start. And we have no traffic behind me. And here we go. Nope, I'm waiting.
Yeah, you're in a blind hill there.
It's not that blind. This guy's turning right, so we're okay. And off we go. Second gear, third gear, overdrive. Okay, now if I shift from overdrive position, which is the D position, the shift down 1, this is going to gear number 2, but the detent in the overdrive transmission is actually going into drive 1-to-1, which is third gear. So you might be able to tell the engine speed difference. Right now I'm running about 1600 RPM. Now we're in drive and I'm running just over 2000 RPM. If I go down one more, it'll go to second gear, but not the first because I'm going too fast for it to be in first gear. But as I slow the car down, it will suddenly drop into first gear when the governor tells the transmission it's okay to do so based on engine speed. I'm going to pull over up here and let that happen. Now we're in first gear, and that's how that works. Now, as far as upshifting manually, I'm in the first gear position. It'll stay in first gear while I'm moving, but if I move up 1, it doesn't go to second gear, it goes into drive, which is third gear. To get it to go to second gear, I have to pull it back into the number 1 detent position again. So the number 1 position for an overdrive transmission acts for gears 1 and 2 by starting in 1, going up, back 1, and then it shifts into second. Then we go to third, and then we go into overdrive. It's very unusual behavior. I'll try to demonstrate that in a moment. Got some cars coming I've got to wait for before I can move out. But I will do the shifting on a manual basis. First gear. Second gear. Third gear. Overdrive. So that's the behavior that we have with an automatic overdrive transmission using the original 3-speed shifter. It will work through all 4 gears. Just gotta know how to do it. Okay, that's all I've got for this session.